The head of the Department of Justice, Attorney General Merrick Garland, held in contempt of Congress. And life-threatening flooding in South Florida as more torrential rain is expected. The Morning Rundown starts now.
From the Straight Arrow News Studio, bringing the stories that matter to you from across the United States and around the world. This is the Morning Rundown.
Today is Thursday, June 13th. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kara Rucker. In an effort led by Republicans, the U.S. House has voted to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress and refer the top Department of Justice official for criminal charges. It comes after Garland refused to turn over audio recordings of President Joe Biden's interview with former special counsel Robert Hur as part of the probe over his handling of classified documents. The 216 to 207 vote fell along party lines, with only one Republican, Representative David Joyce of Ohio, voting against it. The vote marks a major escalation in a months-long dispute over the recordings, which started after President Biden asserted executive privilege over the files. The DOJ has stood by the decision not to release the recordings, saying they've already provided transcripts. DOJ officials writing in an affidavit, the transcripts accurately matches the audio except for minor instances like leaving out filler words or when words were repeated when spoken. House Republicans argue the recordings are crucial to their impeachment inquiry into the president, which has stalled.
He is refusing to comply with a lawful subpoena, and that's a problem under Article 1. We have to defend the Constitution. We have to defend the authority of Congress. We can't allow the Department of Justice, an executive branch agency, to hide information from Congress. We have important oversight responsibilities, and that is what is being pursued here.
Attorney General Garland responded to the decision to hold him in contempt late last night, saying it is deeply disappointing that this House of Representatives has turned a serious congressional authority into a partisan weapon. Today's vote disregards the constitutional separation of powers, the Justice Department's need to protect its investigations, and the substantial amount of information we have provided to the committees. President Joe Biden is in Italy today for the G7 summit, where he is expected to sign a 10-year bilateral security pact with Ukraine. This agreement is said to better strengthen the long-term security relationship between the two nations, with commitments to continue training Ukrainian armed forces, enhance weapons production cooperation, and increase intelligence sharing. The G7 leaders are also set to endorse a plan to provide Ukraine with $50 billion in loans using frozen Russian assets to fund the initiative. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan mentioned that while the major aspects of the plan have been agreed upon, some details will still need to be finalized. Additionally, on Wednesday, the U.S. expanded its sanctions against Moscow to include Chinese companies that supply semiconductors. This move aims to pressure Beijing over its support for Russia and address issues of industrial overcapacity. The summit is also addressing other critical global issues, including the Middle East, migration, and artificial intelligence. The Biden administration is facing its first lawsuit over President Joe Biden's recent order temporarily shutting down the U.S. southern border. The lawsuit, filed by the American Civil Liberties Union on behalf of a coalition of immigrant advocacy groups, is the first big challenge to the executive order put in place just over a week ago. The restrictions bar migrants from seeking asylum when border encounters rise above 2,500 per day. In its first week implemented, the number of migrants crossing has fallen by 25%, according to DHS officials. However, the number of migrants coming over is still more than the number allowed, about 3,000 per day. The executive action was meant to make illegal border crossers ineligible for asylum, but officials say thousands of migrants a day are still being released into the U.S. because of limited options. The lawsuit did not seek an emergency injunction to block the new rule, so it will stay in place while the challenge plays out in court. The Federal Reserve held interest rates steady, potentially delaying any rate cuts until December. Fed Chair Jerome Powell, speaking after a two-day policy meeting, says the U.S. economy's growth and unemployment rates are performing better than long-term sustainable levels, prompting the decision to maintain the current rate. During a press conference, Powell said inflation has been decreasing without severely impacting the economy, and he anticipates this trend could continue. The Fed plans a gradual return of inflation to its 2% target.
We know that reducing policy restraint too soon, or too much, could result in a reversal of the progress that we've seen on inflation. At the same time, reducing policy restraint too late or too little could unduly weaken economic activity and employment. In considering any adjustments to the target range for the federal funds rate, the committee will carefully assess incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks.
Powell says while some details of future rate cuts are still being finalized, the timing of these cuts will depend on a range of economic data, including labor market health and growth projections. As the Fed's latest interest rate announcement was made, our own Simone Del Rosario and former Kansas City Fed President Thomas Honig had live analysis of the future of monetary policy. To get the full story, download the Straight Arrow News app or head over to our website at san.com. For the third day in a row, heavy rain is threatening more destructive flooding in South Florida after Wednesday's storms turned streets into rivers and rushed into homes. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis declared an emergency for 5 counties after dangerous flooding immobilized the operations of critical infrastructure, including major interstates, roadways, schools, and the Miami and Fort Lauderdale airports. On Tuesday night alone, a record-breaking 8 inches of rain hit Florida's west coast in just 3 hours. Flood watches are in effect through tomorrow night across South Florida, which is the state's most populous area, as more rounds of heavy rainfall are expected. Meteorologists say many parts of the state are likely to see double-digit rainfall totals by the time the storms fully pass. Finally, this morning, 3 Russian warships and a nuclear-powered submarine conducted drills Tuesday in the Atlantic Ocean while en route to Cuba. The Russian Defense Ministry said the drills involved simulated attacks on distant mock targets. The Russian fleet is scheduled to arrive in Cuba, just 100 miles from Florida's Key West, and will later move to Venezuela on Monday. These exercises mark the first joint Russian naval and air maneuvers in the Caribbean since 2019. Despite the proximity, Cuba has assured these visits are routine among allies, and the vessels carry no nuclear weapons, posing no threat to the region. The White House views these drills as Russia's response to U.S. support for Ukraine, but does not see them as a threat to U.S. national security. These are your top stories for this Thursday. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Until then, I'm Kara Rucker. Have a great day.